of one of our wellness. So good morning again, everybody, at Online Home Church.
Morning.
Joining us. After that brief discussion of the Webb telescope and the image from NASA that we received via Instagram this week, I'll post that on our website and on our own Instagram page and talk about the Lord, the Almighty, as we think about the awesomeness of the universe and we think about how God has created everything we have and everything we are. That kind of sets the table for our discussion of Mary and Martha in our gospel lesson today. Jesus is visiting his friends, Mary and Martha, the two sisters, and of course, the brother that's not named in this lesson. Y'all know who that is because he's most famous for dying and most famous for being brought back to life. It's the last miracle Jesus performs before the passion, his death, and resurrection. Lazarus is Mary and Martha's brother, and Jesus is friends with them. He travels all around Galilee. He travels around Judea, preaching this message of good news to everyone he can see. But he tends to come back to the same group of people, his friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And so in our gospel lesson today, Jesus is having supper with Mary and Martha, and presumably Lazarus and the apostles are there. But it's interesting. How many of y'all have a brother or a sister? See a show of hands. You can do that online. Yeah, I see it. And how many of y'all have ever had to share chores with your brother or your sister? I will say in our house, given that I have all three children, either here in person or online, I will say in our house, it was very much as it was growing up with my brother. We kept track not only of chores, but who did how much for each chore. And in fact, our sons in particular put laser-like focus on the amount of effort each was putting towards a chore, much more so than the chore itself. And so when Martha says, Jesus, come on, this isn't right. I've got many tasks to deal with today. And Mary's just sitting there. Tell her to get up and help me. How does Jesus respond? He doesn't say, you're right, Martha, you're pulling too much of your own weight. Mary, go on and help her. Instead, he says, Martha, you're too focused on the tasks at hand. Mary has chosen to listen to me. And he describes that as the better part, right? He describes that as the better part. And so in our online email announcement of our service today, I said we're going to talk about God-life balance. And that's part of why we listened to this hymn this morning, taking the time to ponder anew what the Almighty can do. I've been thinking about this a lot for the last decade or so. When I first got into ministry, I started off by going to our pastor at St. Philip's, George Maxwell, who's a terrific guy. And I said, George, I feel like I'm getting called. I originally got called into ministry back in college in the early 90s, but it was more of a ring on your phone, right? But as the decades wore on, it turned into more like an Amber Alert, right? Where you can't ignore it. And then by the time I went to see George, it was more like a tornado siren. God was calling me and it was time to go. But unless you open your ears and unless you open your heart and unless you open your mind, you're not able to hear that call. So it's not so much a question of making time as it is making room. When I went to see George and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about, he said, well, let's just talk about what your prayer schedule looks like. And to this day, I still reflect on that because my answer to him was, well, I pray 3 times a day before every meal. I'm a square meal kind of guy. That's how we go. And he was like, no, I mean other prayers. And I'm like, well, I pray on Sunday when I go to church. And he just shook his head because his thought was, just like Jesus is talking to Martha today about Mary, was really not so much your schedule, although that's how many of us think about our days. It's when are you making time for God? But over the last decade, I've begun to think further about it and think it's not so much about time. How many of you in a typical day feel like you've got too much to do? Mm-hmm. And so when Jesus is saying, I'm raising my hand too, Jay, you know what? I'm going to raise both hands. When Jesus is saying, Martha, you've focused on the task at hand, but your sister is putting her efforts in the better part. What he's saying is you need to make room for me. And how many times have we heard in the gospel lessons, Jesus saying, those who have ears, listen. right? He's saying, make room for me and make room for my message, not just time to pray. Although that is ultimately how we go about doing this. There are three ways, kind of classically, there are three ways to encounter the living God for most people. One is through prayer. And you can schedule time to pray every day, like George is getting at, but you don't have to. One of my very favorite parishioners back in my first church in Duluth, which was an international church. We had folks from all over the world who had moved to Gwinnett County, and we were focused on trying to make this Episcopal way of worshiping and celebrating open to them. And they came to us with Anglican experiences from all over. This particular woman was Jamaican and had a beautiful spirit. And I asked her one time, well, how often do you pray? And she said, well, how many hours are there in the day? I said, 24. And she said, yeah, and I'm probably awake half of those, maybe 12, 14. So that's 14 hours, and there's 60 minutes in an hour. I think then probably 800 or 900 times a day. And I went, what? What are you talking about? How do you get anything done? She says, that's not the point, Rich. I pray while I'm doing everything. while I'm cutting vegetables for supper, while I'm making sandwiches, while I'm driving in my car, I'm praying to God unceasingly. Isn't that wonderful?
Amen.
I've never been able to get my mind and my heart into that kind of mode. But I think back on that experience and think, well, that may be not my approach, but that is certainly someone's, and something to think about. You know, can you in your life make room for God that you're praying constantly and developing a relationship with him that is that close and that constant? That's the first way, is through prayer. The second is through nature. I showed y'all, for those of you who are joining us online and here in the room, showed you the picture of the Carina Nebula. We'll post that online afterwards. But when we take a look at nature around us, it's not just the beautiful trees and the animals like we have next door here in our new home, goats and chickens and ducks, but it's taking a look at the heavens above and appreciating nature. One of the ways that we commune with God is by appreciating nature. On my walk this morning, Caroline, I noticed we have a deep blue sky today, a full moon. And I'll show you a picture afterwards. There's a beautiful blue or pink crepe myrtle blooming right at the edge of the lacrosse fields at school. And when you look up at this blue sky and this beautiful pink crepe myrtle and the white full moon in the blue sky, you begin to appreciate the awesomeness of God. Even without praying, just taking a moment to make room for God in that time. The final way, and this is one of the focuses of online home church, because we try and give to the world and share our blessings in the name of Jesus Christ, of all that God has blessed us with. The final way to encounter people and make room for God in your life is through love and through working with other people. Whether it's somebody helping you or you helping somebody, you can develop a relationship with God just by interacting with other people. There's two reasons that's the case. Number one is we get to live part of that commandment that Jesus gave us. Love one another as I have loved you. The other is every single one of us here in the room, every single one of us online, every single person on the planet is made in God's image. And so when we work with others, whether we help them or they're helping us, we're interacting with someone who's made in the image of God. And that puts us closer to him. So whether it's prayer, appreciation of nature, or working with others in a loving relationship, these are all opportunities to make room for God. And so you don't need to think about God-life balance or, man, to this day, I still don't have a prayer schedule like George Maxwell wanted me to 12 years ago. It's okay. If you're making room for God, you're experiencing this better part that Jesus talked to Martha about. And I'll say one last thing. Teenagers especially who hear this message where Jesus is saying, hey, Mary's sitting here listening to me, Martha. Don't worry about all your earthly tasks. Don't read that the wrong way. You still got to do your chores. You can pray. You can listen to sermons and listen to podcasts about God and all that, but you still got to get your chores done. People who work, you still got to get your work done. This is not an excuse for kind of slacking off. It's making room for God, even while you're taking care of all your earthly business. Josh.
When you're praying that much, like 800, 900 times a day, like I feel like I pray when something's like really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's probably not a great thing, but what is there to pray about after like that many times?
It's a great point. For those of you who are online, Josh is asking, when you're praying 800 or 900 times a day, I feel like I pray about important things, but what's there to pray about after all of that praying's done? Josh, I'm with you. I tend to pray about what I think are important things. I tend to pray about the health of my loved ones, as we're fixing to say in the prayers of the people. I pray for those that are in need or communities in need, like the Ukraine, the important things. I think her point is that the way she lived her life, every single thing is important to her and to God. And that's why I'm saying this is not for everybody, but it sure was for her. God, as I pet this dog, thank you for this dog. God, as I turn on this light switch, thank you for electricity. God, as I turn on the car, thank you for a car. You see what I mean? And that to me is a whole different way of thinking about the world. And honestly, that's the kind of room that I look for making for God in my life, because it's easy, just like Martha, to let all the tasks kind of crowd him out. That's an excellent question. And I'll say finally, everybody, that the setting in our gospel lesson today is at supper. And Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet listening to what he's teaching. If Jesus Christ ever comes to supper at your house, don't worry about the chores, order pizza, right? Don't worry about fixing supper. Listen to what he has to say. And I'm going to go ahead and invite myself over. Call me, because I'm on the way. And blessings to you all this Sunday morning.
Thank
Amen.
you.
And now with Christians around the world and across time, let's say together the Nicene Creed.